Is there anything more English than tea? The link is so strong that in an informal way of referring to a cup of tea, the drink itself doesn't even have to be mentioned. Let's have a cuppa. In a crisis or when someone is upset, the first thing that people will say is, "I'll put the kettle on," or "Would you like a cup of tea?" Also, the fact that in the past few decades coffee has become more popular hasn't changed anything. Even confirmed coffee drinkers will readily admit that tea still has a special importance. Now, I mentioned England and English rather than British, and I really meant that, because in the other nations, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, the link with tea is less strong than in England. So you can really say that it's traditionally English rather than British. Tea became popular in England during the second half of the 17th century, about 350 years ago. Up until then, access to tea leaves coming from the Far East had been quite limited. But once import became more plentiful, tea became rapidly quite popular. Traditionally, tea is drunk with milk in Britain, and the common man's cuppa is quite strong with plenty of milk. You only have to look at the difference between British tea bags and continental tea bags to immediately realize that in Britain, tea is drunk much stronger than on the continent. An average English tea bag contains 2.5 to 3 grams of tea, whereas an average continental tea bag only contains 1.5 grams. So on the continent, we're used to drinking our tea quite weak if you compare it to English tea. Making tea with loose tea leaves is something for special occasions, for posh tea rooms or hotels. Ordinary people, or so-called ordinary people, tend to use tea bags, if only because it's much easier. If you want to hear an argument, the only thing you need to mention to a couple of English people is milk in connection with tea. And then ask them, do you put in milk first or afterwards? The discussion can get pretty heated. Tea is not only a drink, but can also refer to a meal. We've all heard of afternoon tea, and that traditionally consists of freshly made tea with finger sandwiches, definitely no crust. Among the finger sandwiches, you will have cucumber sandwiches, and then also cakes and scones. Afternoon tea is said to have been invented by the 7th Duchess of Bedford around 1840. She thought that the time between lunch and dinner was far too long, and she felt hungry around 4 in the afternoon. And that's why she began to have tea, afternoon tea. On the BBC website, you can find quite an interesting video on how to take tea like a true Brit. I'll add the link below. Apart from afternoon tea, there's also cream tea, very often called Devonshire cream tea or Cornish cream tea. It consists of, obviously, tea with scones, clotted cream and jam, usually strawberry jam. Cream tea has its own controversy. What do you put on your scone first, the cream or the jam? High tea, or simply tea, is actually an early evening meal with hot, savoury food. In many working class families, they will never use the word dinner to refer to an evening meal. It's just, let's have tea. To round off, let's have a look at a couple of expressions with tea. If you don't like something, you might say, that's not my cup of tea. You can also use that positively. This is really my cup of tea. If you have a strong dislike for something, for an action, and you really don't want to do it, you might say, not for all the tea in China. Definitely not. And if a crisis, a controversy, an argument is actually not as important as it might first have seemed, it's called a storm in a teacup. Well, all this talk about tea has left me thirsty. I'm dying for a cuppa.